The pattern just broke, and what is replacing it is going to be far more dangerous than the heat you have been living through. 3 things are now on a collision course: a major severe weather outbreak, a flash flood emergency already unfolding across the south, and a tropical system that already hit the Gulf Coast. And they are all happening at the same time. Today, I am going to walk you through every single piece of this, including what the GFS and the European model both agree on for the next 7 days, a deep look at the El Nino pattern driving everything, and the one area I am watching most closely heading into the final week of June. If your state is in the southern plains, the Ohio Valley, the Midwest, or anywhere along the Gulf Coast, you need every detail in this video. My name is Arthur and you are watching Sky Space Lab. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button because we track these patterns every single day, and right now the data is moving fast. Let's get into it. Let me start with what is happening right now, today, June 22nd. The Weather Prediction Center has a moderate risk of excessive rainfall in effect this morning for parts of the Central Plains, the Middle Mississippi Valley, and the Ohio Valley. That is a level 3 out of 4. That is not a routine forecast. WPC issues moderate risk only when forecasters have high confidence that widespread, potentially dangerous flooding is coming. We're talking about rainfall totals of 2 inches per hour in some areas. That is the kind of rate that overwhelms storm drains in minutes and turns roadways into rivers before you even know it is happening. The frontal boundary driving this is stalled. Stalled boundaries are the worst-case flooding scenario. When a front stops moving, storms train along the same line for hours. One storm dumps 2 inches on your neighborhood, and before the water even starts draining, another storm drops 2 more inches in the same spot. The WPC noted that neighborhood probabilities of 3 inches per 6 hours are running above 40 to 50% within the moderate risk zone. If you live near that boundary from eastern Missouri through southern Illinois and Indiana, you need to have your flood safety plan ready today. Here are the locations most at risk right now: Kansas City, Springfield, Missouri, St. Louis, Evansville, Indiana, and areas across central and southern Illinois. The WPC also flagged southeastern Oklahoma into central Arkansas as a secondary concentration for the heaviest rates. 2 inch per hour rainfall rates are possible there as well. Now here is the deeper story. This is not just today. The WPC extended forecast discussion issued yesterday afternoon specifically called out a series of shortwave disturbances embedded in broad troughing across the eastern 2/3 of the country. What that means in plain language is this: there is no single storm to track. There is a conveyor belt of energy moving through a stationary boundary. Each piece of energy lights up a new cluster of storms over the same geography. This is how you get catastrophic multi-day flooding. This is how rivers go from normal to at flood stage in under 36 hours. The Ohio and Mississippi Valley corridor needs to be on high alert not just today, but through Wednesday. And while that flooding emergency unfolds in the Midwest, the Gulf Coast is still dealing with the aftermath of Tropical Storm Arthur, the first named storm of the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season. Arthur made landfall just northeast of Matagorda Bay, Texas on June 17th. Maximum sustained winds at landfall were 40 miles per hour. That is below hurricane threshold, but the rainfall is what made Arthur dangerous. NHC Director Michael Brennan said clearly, "The main threat from Arthur is a prolonged multi-day heavy rainfall event," and he was right. Southeastern Louisiana recorded rainfall rates of 3 inches per hour. Storm total rainfall in some areas approached 20 inches. At least 2 fatalities were confirmed in Texas from flash flooding before the storm even had a name. Arthur's remnant moisture is still being pulled northward and eastward by the same jet stream dynamics driving today's flooding threat. The WPC is tracking its influence through the lower Mississippi Valley and into Alabama and the Florida Panhandle through today and tomorrow. So if you are in Pensacola, Mobile, Biloxi, or the lower Mississippi corridor, this is not over. What does the next 7 days look like? Let me walk you through it date by date. Today, Monday, June 22nd. The primary threat is excessive rainfall across the Central Plains, Middle Mississippi Valley and Ohio Valley. The moderate risk from WPC covers a large area. On the severe weather side, the SPC has been watching shortwave energy embedded in the broader trough. Damaging wind gusts and large hail are possible along and ahead of the frontal boundary today, particularly across Missouri, Iowa and southern Illinois. Any supercell that fires ahead of the main line could produce a brief tornado before storm mode transitions to a squall line. The flooding threat is the primary concern. Tuesday, June 23rd, the WPC has a marginal risk of excessive rainfall from portions of the Central Plains to the southeast for Day 3. That is Tuesday into early Wednesday. The frontal boundary shifts slightly but does not clear. A second piece of shortwave energy swings through. Storms could fire along the remnant boundary across Arkansas, Tennessee, and into Mississippi. Rainfall totals are unlikely to match today, but could still produce 1 to 2 inches per hour in isolated areas. The SPC Day, 2 Outlook from Norman continues to highlight the central and southern plains for organised severe weather potential as the low-pressure system tracks eastward. Wednesday, June 24th marks the transition. The WPC extended forecast discussion specifically said, a long-wave trough over the northern United States and a dome of mid and upper ridging orienting over the southwestern US begins to take shape by Wednesday. This is the pattern change everyone has been waiting for. But here is where it gets really interesting, and I will show you exactly why in just a moment. By Thursday, June 25th, the cut-off trough the WPC mentioned in their latest discussion drops southward as the subtropical jet lifts north. The ridge builds across the desert southwest and into portions of the Intermountain West. That ridge is going to do something very specific to your weather over the next several days that most people are not talking about yet. Friday, June 27th through Sunday, June 29th. The WPC extended forecast from yesterday afternoon clearly flagged additional heavy rainfall potential for the Central Plains. A lingering frontal boundary draped across the Mid-South to the Central Plains, coupled with shortwave energy aloft, will fuel another round of thunderstorm complexes. The desert southwest stays hot. Phoenix is going to be dealing with temperatures well above 100 degrees through this period. Las Vegas and Tucson are in the same category. And by next weekend, the SPC 4 to 8 day outlook explicitly stated, and I want you to hear this directly, deterministic, ensemble, and AI guidance all indicate a strong jet streak and mid-level trough traversing the Rockies toward the end of next weekend and into early next week. SPC forecasters wrote that a substantial severe weather threat seems possible by the end of next weekend and early into the following week, across portions of the central and northern plains into the upper Midwest. When SPC says that at 8 days out, that is not a routine mention. That is a red flag. Now let me give you the big picture because this is where the story changes. The heat dome that baked the eastern United States over the past week is now giving way to the pattern I just described. But what replaces it is not a simple cool down. It is a regime change in the atmosphere that sets up a much more volatile severe weather environment heading into the final week of June and beyond. Here is the mechanism. We have been living in an omega block. High pressure locked in place across the southern tier of the country, storms pushed to the northern fringes, humidity and heat trapped underneath. That pattern is now breaking down from the west. A series of Pacific shortwaves are diving into the trough across the northern plains. Each wave provides a new lifting mechanism over a moist, unstable air mass that has been building up beneath the heat dome. It is like pouring cold water on a pot that is still sitting on a hot stove. When those shortwaves hit that unstable air, storms explode. The WPC made something very clear in their extended forecast discussion issued Sunday afternoon. The ECMWFEPQI for precipitable water is running near 2 standard deviations above normal across much of the Ohio Valley and into the mid-Atlantic. That number should catch your attention. 2 standard deviations above normal for precipitable water content in late June means the atmosphere is loaded with fuel for heavy rainfall events. The storms that develop over the next week have access to more moisture than you would typically see this time of year. That is why the WPC has been issuing moderate risk and slight risk outlooks several days in advance rather than waiting until the day before. Updated just this morning, the WPC short-range forecast discussion flagged, impactful flash floods and severe storms are expected over the plains and Midwest today and tomorrow. Widespread thunderstorms with a flash flood threat are expected across the Northeast, Ohio and Tennessee and lower Mississippi valleys, and into the southern plains Monday. Conditions remain uncomfortably hot across the southeast, with stifling humidity in place. Now let me tell you what El Nino means for this specific pattern. The Nino 3.4 index was already approaching +1 by early June, which is getting close to moderate El Nino status. Sea surface temperatures south of Hawaii and hugging up along the South American coastline are very warm. Climate Impact Company, whose analog forecasting I follow closely, Specifically flagged in their 2026 seasonal outlook, El Nino inhibits Atlantic hurricane activity, but the vigorously warmer than normal southeastern North Pacific creates an unusual risk of crossover Mexico tropical systems reforming in the Gulf waters. That is exactly what you saw with Tropical Storm Arthur, whose moisture originated partly from former Eastern Pacific Tropical Storm Christina, per AccuWeather. El Nino also enhances the subtropical jet stream across the southern United States. When you enhance the subtropical jet, you build more frequent moisture surges up from the south into the plains and the Midwest. More moisture plus more shortwave energy equals more severe weather. AccuWeather's lead meteorologist specifically called this out in the summer 2026 forecast. Severe weather can pick up in June and July with near to above average tornadoes from the plains to the east coast. El Nino is expected to strengthen and could evolve into a rare Super El Nino later in 2026. That is not a prediction I am making. That is the signal from AccuWeather and NOAA's ENSO team combined. Most channels are not showing you this part, but the Super El Nino signal matters enormously for the rest of your summer. Historic Super El Nino events like 1997 to 98 and 2015 to 2016 fundamentally changed storm tracks across the southern and central United States for entire seasons. If the current El Nino achieves super status by October, the full severe weather pattern, the late season tropical risk and the winter outlook all shift dramatically. I will be tracking this number every single week. Before we wrap up, there is one more thing you need to know, and this is the part I've been building toward. Let me talk about the tropics, not just Arthur, that is already past. I want to talk about what comes next, because the combination of El Nino dynamics, extremely warm sea surface temperatures in the Gulf waters, and the pattern shift I just described creates a very specific window of vulnerability in the next 30 to 40 days. The NHC Tropical Weather Outlook from Saturday, June 20th shows no development expected in the Atlantic Basin for the next 7 days. The Gulf waters are currently being suppressed by the high-pressure ridge that kept your heat dome in place. Wind shear over the Gulf has been above normal, but here is what matters. That ridge is moving. The WPC, the GFS and the European model all agree that the upper-level ridge is transitioning westward over the coming days. When the ridge moves west, shear drops over the eastern Gulf waters and the Caribbean. That is when the window opens. Climate Impact Company's 2026 North Atlantic seasonal outlook specifically flagged the unusual risk of a crossover Mexico tropical system reforming in the western Gulf waters is possible this season. The mechanism is exactly what you saw with Arthur: Eastern Pacific moisture crossing Mexico's narrow geography and reforming over the extremely warm Gulf water temperatures. The bulk of anomalous warmth in the Gulf Basin is concentrated in the northern Gulf waters and east of the Bahamas, per the Climate Impact Company analysis. Sea surface temperatures there are running above normal enough to support rapid intensification of any organised system that gets into that warm pool. NOAA's seasonal forecast calls for 8 to 14 named storms, 3 to 6 hurricanes, and 1 to 3 major hurricanes for the 2026 Atlantic season. That is below average largely because of El Nino wind shear. But below average does not mean safe. The 2023 season is a perfect analogue. Below average storm totals and yet catastrophic impacts from the storms that did develop. Climate Impact Company's analog forecast specifically called out a significant tropical cyclone risk, landfalling on the East Coast during August. I am going to be watching the second half of August very carefully. The NHC Atlantic tropical weather discussion from early Sunday morning showed tropical waves moving westward across the Atlantic. A far eastern Atlantic tropical wave has its axis along 23 west, from 3 north to 15 north, moving westward at 10 knots. Scattered moderate convection is developing in the warm pools south of 12 north. These early season waves are weak and disorganized, but they are the seeds of everything that develops later. As the ITCZ lifts northward through July and August and dust coverage thins, these waves gain access to more moisture and less hostile environments. What I am specifically watching for the next 30 days is the Gulf waters window. Right now, shear is keeping everything suppressed there. The high ridge is still doing its job, but as that ridge migrates west by late June and into early July, the shear axis shifts. A well-organized tropical wave or Central American gyre disturbance that tracks into the Caribbean at the right moment, around days 8 to 12 from now, would have access to sea surface temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius in the Gulf waters basin, low vertical wind shear in the northeastern Gulf, and a moist atmospheric column with precipitable water content already running well above average. AccuWeather specifically noted this week that conditions in parts of the Gulf and Western Atlantic could become more favourable for tropical development later this month. That is not a certainty, but it is not a dismissal either. When both AccuWeather and Climate Impact Company are watching the same window, and when the model signals, even if noisy and beyond day 8, are showing low pressure developing in the Caribbean and tracking northward, you watch it every day. Where are you watching from? Drop your city and state in the comments right now. I want to know which parts of this forecast hit closest to home for you, and whether you're dealing with the flooding, the heat, or something else entirely. The GFS and Euro are not in perfect agreement on timing beyond day 7. That is normal. What is not normal is that both models are painting a similar large-scale pattern. A trough locked over the northern United States, a ridge dominating the southwest, Gulf moisture surging northward along the eastern edge of that ridge, and repeated rounds of severe weather from the plains through the Midwest. When GFS and Euro agree on a pattern like this at 7+ days, you pay attention. The SPC Day 4 through 8 outlook was unusually explicit for this time range. 30 to 50 knots of mid-level winds across the high plains, strong upslope flow, an unstable warm sector that will shift location daily based on where prior convection fired, and the explicit mention of a substantial severe weather threat possible by the end of next weekend. I think we are looking at multiple organised severe weather days from the central and northern plains into the upper Midwest between June 27th and July 1st. Derecho potential is real with this type of setup. The jet will be strong, the boundaries will be backed up, and the Cape values in advance of the trough could exceed 2,000 joules per kilogram across the northern plains. That is a serious tornado environment. If you live anywhere from Omaha to Minneapolis to Indianapolis, the end of next weekend and early the following week is a period I want you to have your severe weather plan ready for. Know your shelter location. Know what a tornado watch versus a tornado warning means. Have multiple alert methods. Do not rely on your phone alone if you're in a strong signal dead zone. Thank you for spending this time with me. This video took a lot of research today, and every piece of data in it is current as of this morning. If you found value in it, hit the like button and share it with someone in the flood zone or the severe weather zone right now. They may not be watching the right channels yet. Tomorrow I will be watching the SPC Day 1 outlook very closely as the next round of severe weather begins to take shape across the southern plains and into the Tennessee Valley. I also want to revisit the El Nino sea surface temperature anomalies with fresh NOAA data, because the numbers moved again last week. If the Gulf waters window starts to look more favourable by midweek, I will do a dedicated tropical video. Drop your questions in the comments. I read every single one. Stay safe out there. Let me also give you a clear picture of the longer range setup, because this is where the data gets genuinely remarkable. I do not use that word lightly. What NOAA's Climate Prediction Center published in their June outlook and what AccuWeather's summer 2026 forecast confirmed together paint a consistent picture for the rest of this month and into July. The period from June 27th through July 5th is being flagged by multiple forecast centers as the highest probability window for organised severe weather outbreaks this summer across the central and northern plains and the Midwest. Here is why. El Nino strengthens the subtropical jet stream and keeps it active later into the summer season than you typically see. Normally by late June, the severe weather belt is retreating northward into the Dakotas and fading in intensity. But with a strengthening El Nino pumping extra moisture into the southern tier and the Pacific trough driving repeated shortwave energy from the west, the severe weather season extends. June this year has already been remarkably active. NWS Chicago documented that from January 1st through late April, their forecast area recorded more tornado and severe thunderstorm watches than in any comparable period in recorded history. 20 tornadoes in the NWS Chicago area by mid-April, when the typical full-year count is 10 to 20. That hyperactive signal does not switch off in June. It intensifies in June. This is peak tornado season for the northern plains and upper Midwest, and you are heading into it with an atmosphere that is loaded with moisture, a jet stream that is highly active, and a pattern that keeps delivering shortwave energy into an unstable air mass. The NOAA CPC seasonal outlook specifically highlighted June as the period when above-average tornado frequency from the plains to the East Coast is most likely. I think they are right. Here is a question I want you to think about. Have you updated your severe weather action plan in the last 12 months? Most people do it once and forget about it. Drop a yes or no in the comments. It would genuinely help me understand what kind of preparedness content to prioritize. Now let me talk about the heat, because even though the pattern is breaking down across the northern and eastern tier, the heat is not retreating everywhere. It is consolidating. The WPC extended forecast from Sunday specifically said, an upper-level ridge will maintain the heat across the desert southwest, into portions of the Intermountain West, before a more pronounced trough dips into the Pacific Northwest by next weekend. Phoenix, Las Vegas, Tucson, El Paso, Albuquerque, you are staying hot. AccuWeather's summer forecast called the West and Northwest the core of the heat concern, with the worst conditions expected across California, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming, fueling a widespread fire threat. The wildfire risk is something I want to flag specifically. When you take prolonged heat, below normal precipitation, and low humidity and combine them with strong winds from the trough passage, you get explosive fire weather conditions. The National Interagency Fire Center has been watching the Intermountain West closely. The heat dome that just dominated the pattern helped dry out fuel moisture to critically low levels across the Great Basin and portions of the southwest. When that trough passes through next weekend and kicks up southwest winds, fire risk elevates sharply across Nevada, Utah, Idaho, and eastern Oregon. I do not want to understate this. Wildfire can move faster than you can drive. If you live in any of those states, pay attention to red flag warnings from your local NWS office over the next 10 days. They are not issued lightly. Back to the severe weather track. Let me give you the specific geography I am watching most closely for the late June outbreak the SPC flagged. The setup that concerns me most is what happens when the strong jets streak the SPC mentioned, running at 30 to 50 knots at mid-levels across the high plains, combines with the backed southerly winds at the surface from Gulf moisture surging northward. That combination creates ideal wind shear profiles for long-track tornadoes. I want to be clear, I am not forecasting a major outbreak yet. 8 days is too far out for that level of confidence. But when SPC forecasters are explicitly noting agreement between deterministic models, ensemble systems, and AI guidance for a substantial severe weather threat at that range, I take that seriously. The corridor I am watching most carefully runs from central Nebraska and Kansas northward, through South Dakota and into southern Minnesota. The geography there is flat, open, and sits in the sweet spot between the moisture return from the south and the dry line punching east from the Rockies. If the jet streak positions favourably and the timing lines up, you could see discrete supercells firing across that region with significant tornado potential. Cities in that corridor, Omaha, Lincoln, Sioux Falls, Sioux City, Rapid City, Aberdeen, Fargo, Bismarck, and the smaller communities across western Iowa and southeastern South Dakota. I would also watch Kansas City and Wichita depending on exactly where the dry line sets up. Both cities have been relatively quiet this June. That quiet period can create complacency, and then a single big outbreak catches people off guard. Now, I want to bring the El Nino and the tropical picture together, because they are not separate stories. They are the same story. The updated ENSO monitoring from early June shows the Nino 3.4 index approaching +1. The IRI Columbia University and NOAA CFS version 2 ensemble forecasts both show continued warming through the summer and into fall. Colorado State University's seasonal outlook, Climate Impact Company's forecast, and NOAA all converged on a below-average Atlantic hurricane season as the headline number, but they all also flagged specific scenarios where that average hides a significant risk. Climate Impact Company's exact language was this: well known is the suppressing effect of El Nino on North Atlantic Basin tropical cyclones due to upper-level westerly wind shear. But they also noted that the intensity forecast rivals the strong El Nino events of 1997 to 98 and 2015 to 2016. And their analogue forecast specifically called out a significant tropical cyclone risk landfalling on the East Coast during August, plus an unusual risk of crossover Mexico systems reforming in the Gulf waters all season long. This is the part that keeps me watching the tropics every day, even when the NHC outlook says no development expected. Because the setup Climate Impact Company described is precisely what happened with Tropical Storm Arthur. A Pacific system, the remnants of Eastern Pacific Tropical Storm Christina, pumped moisture across Mexico's narrow waist. The Gulf waters provided exceptionally warm sea surface temperatures, and a tropical system organized and made landfall within days. That process can repeat. When does the next window open? Roughly late June into early July. The ridge that has been suppressing Gulf shear is moving west. The NHC noted that the high-pressure ridging over the Gulf waters is influencing wind patterns as of Sunday morning, with fresh southeast winds in the northern Yucatan area. When that high moves further west, the shear axis moves with it. The eastern and northeastern Gulf waters are left exposed. Sea surface temperatures in the Gulf waters right now are running above average, concentrated in the northern Gulf and east of the Bahamas per Climate Impact Company's analysis. Those temperatures are enough to support rapid intensification of an organized system. The ECMWFEPQI for precipitable water content is running near 2 standard deviations above normal for much of the region, which means fuel is not the issue if a system gets going. What the tropics need right now is a reduction in shear and an organized low-level circulation to work with. Both of those conditions become more likely in the last week of June. I am not forecasting a storm. I am telling you the environment is evolving towards something worth watching. When both AccuWeather and the long-range model guidance start painting low pressure, developing in the Caribbean tracking northward in the 8 to 12-day window, that conversation graduates from speculation to monitoring. I will have a dedicated tropical update if anything develops, or if the model signals sharpen. Let me know in the comments if you are specifically watching the tropics. It helps me know how much depth to go into on tropical coverage versus the severe weather and pattern change content. Let me close today with the honest summary of where we stand. You have a moderate risk of excessive rainfall active right now across the Central Plains and Ohio Valley. Flash flooding is the primary immediate threat. The remnants of Tropical Storm Arthur are still dragging moisture through the Gulf South. Severe weather from damaging winds, large hail, and isolated tornadoes is possible today along and ahead of the frontal boundary from Missouri through Indiana. The heat dome is breaking down from the north but consolidating into a permanent ridge across the desert southwest and Great Basin. Wildfire risk is increasing in the west. El Nino is strengthening and could evolve into a super El Nino that reshapes the fall and winter weather pattern. An SPC is already flagging a potentially significant severe weather setup for the last weekend of June into early July across the central and northern plains and upper Midwest. I want to ask you one more thing before I sign off. Looking at everything I just laid out, the flooding today, the heat, the storms ahead, the tropical threat, which piece of this concerns you the most for where you live? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your answers actually shape what I cover in the next video. Thank you for being here today. Share this video with anyone in the flood zone or storm zone who needs to see it. Tomorrow's coverage will depend on what the morning model runs show, and with a pattern this active, I expect changes overnight. Stay safe, stay informed, and I will see you back here tomorrow. One final point before I go, because it connects everything I have said today. There is a reason I build every video around what is happening right now and what comes next. The data I showed you today from WPC, SPC, NHC, AccuWeather, Climate Impact Company, NOAA CPC, and the IRI Columbia University Ensemble guidance tells a single coherent story. This is not a random pile of weather events. It is a pattern, and that pattern has a driver, and that driver is El Nino building in the Pacific and reshaping the atmosphere from west to east. When you understand the driver, you stop being surprised by individual events, and you start seeing the system. That is what I try to do for you in every single video. See you tomorrow. The latest GFS run came in just before this video, and it kept the same general story, but nudged the heaviest rainfall axis slightly southward across Missouri and Arkansas for overnight tonight into Tuesday morning. That is worth knowing if you are near the Missouri-Arkansas state line. The Euro Ensemble mean continues to paint a broad precipitation swath from Kansas City down through Memphis and into the Tennessee Valley through Wednesday. Both models are in unusually strong agreement on the timing of the pattern change by late Wednesday into Thursday. When you see that kind of agreement in June, you trust it. What remains uncertain is exactly how quickly the ridge rebuilds across the southwest, and how much residual moisture makes it north into the Midwest by next weekend. That uncertainty is where the late June severe weather story lives. I will resolve it for you as the models narrow the spread over the coming days. Stay sharp and stay prepared. The latest GFS run came in just before this video, and it kept the same general story, but nudge the heaviest rainfall axis slightly southward across Missouri and Arkansas for overnight tonight into Tuesday morning. That is worth knowing if you are near the Missouri-Arkansas state line. The Euroensemble mean continues to paint a broad precipitation swathe from Kansas City down through Memphis and into the Tennessee Valley through Wednesday. Both models are in unusually strong agreement on the timing of the pattern change by late Wednesday into Thursday. When you see that kind of agreement in June, you trust it. What remains uncertain is exactly how quickly the ridge rebuilds across the southwest and how much residual moisture makes it north into the Midwest by next weekend. That uncertainty is where the late June severe weather story lives. I will resolve it for you as the models narrow the spread over the coming days. Stay sharp and stay prepared.